Romans chapter 4. Today, let's take a look into a chapter where the Apostle Paul shares a profound message about faith, righteousness, and God's unwavering promises. We often think we need to earn God's approval or be perfect to deserve His love. However, Paul flips that idea upside down. He tells us that it's our faith, not our efforts or perfection, that draws us close to God. Paul also uses Abraham, a man of great faith, as an example to show us that trusting God is the key to a relationship with Him. So let's dive deeper into this chapter and understand how each lesson speaks directly to us today. Abraham's faith and righteousness. So, Paul begins by highlighting Abraham, one of the foundational figures in the Bible. Abraham is considered righteous not because of his deeds, but because of his faith in God. When God made Abraham promises that seemed impossible, promises of becoming a father of many nations despite his and Sarah's old age, Abraham didn't waver. He trusted God wholeheartedly, and it was his faith that God credited to him as righteousness. This means that it wasn't about Abraham's achievements or perfection. It was about his willingness to believe in God's character and promises. So think about that for a minute. Faith is the starting point of our relationship with God. We don't need to prove ourselves to be loved by Him. Abraham's story shows us that when we trust in God's goodness and faithfulness, we are accepted and loved. Righteousness, therefore, is not earned. It is freely given to those who believe. Righteousness is a gift, not a wage. So Paul explains that in everyday life, we earn wages based on what we do. It's something we deserve. But God's righteousness isn't something we can work for. If it were, we could never be certain we'd done enough to earn it. Instead, righteousness is a gift that we receive by trusting in God. This gift of righteousness, being seen as right in God's eyes, is given freely because of His love for us. Just like Abraham, we don't have to prove ourselves perfect before God, and this lifts a huge weight from our shoulders. So consider that. God's love is not based on performance. He gives righteousness as a gift to those who have faith, not to those who check every box or follow every rule perfectly. This gift allows us to stand confidently before God without fear of not measuring up. David's perspective on forgiveness. So Paul then brings up King David's words to emphasize the beauty of forgiveness. And David, who made grave mistakes, wrote about the joy and relief of being forgiven by God. In Psalm 32, David talks about the blessings of knowing his sins are forgiven, his mistakes are covered, and his faults are not counted against him. David knew firsthand that we all stumble, but God's mercy covers us. This forgiveness is like a fresh start, letting us experience true freedom and peace. Think about that. Forgiveness is one of God's greatest gifts, no doubt. Even when we make mistakes, God's grace covers us, and we don't have to live in shame. This truth gives us hope and a sense of deep inner joy, knowing we are accepted just as we are. Abraham's faith came before the law. So Paul points out that Abraham's righteousness was declared before he followed any laws or religious rituals like circumcision. This shows that faith came first, before the rituals, rules, or customs, and God was pleased with Abraham because of his belief, not his actions. This also means that Abraham becomes the father of all who believe, both those who follow Jewish law and those who do not. Now, God's love and promise extend to everyone who has faith, regardless of background or tradition. Consider this. God accepts us because of our faith, not because of our adherence to customs or rituals. This truth makes the promise of God's love accessible to everyone, no matter their background. And our faith alone draws us close to Him. God's promise comes through faith, not the law. So God's promise to Abraham of being a father of many nations and receiving a vast inheritance wasn't based on Abraham following laws. It was based on his faith. Paul explains that if God's promises depend on the law, it would rely on human effort, and no one could fulfill it perfectly. God, therefore, designed His promises to depend on faith, so that everyone can receive them. This makes His promises available to all, not just those who can follow religious rules without flaw. So consider that. And this is one of my favorite parts because I think it's a huge misconception. God's promises come to us through faith, not because of rules or achievements. And this gives us freedom and assurance because it's God's faithfulness, not our ability, that fulfills His promises. The power of faith in impossible situations. So Paul describes how Abraham had faith even when God's promise seemed impossible. Abraham and Sarah were both advanced in age, yet Abraham didn't doubt that God would fulfill His promise of giving him a son. He believed that God would do what He said, even though he couldn't see the path forward. This unwavering trust in God's character and power was the key to receiving the promise. So consider that. We too can have faith when situations seem impossible. Abraham's story reminds us that our circumstances don't limit God. If He promises something, He has the power to make it happen, no matter how improbable it looks from our perspective. I want to say that one more time. If God promises you something, He has the power to make it happen, no matter how improbable it looks from our perspective. Our faith and God's righteousness. So Paul closes this chapter by saying that this message wasn't just for Abraham. It's for all of us. Through Jesus' death and resurrection, we too can receive righteousness by faith. Jesus was delivered for our sins and raised to life so that we could stand righteous before God. Our faith in Jesus connects us to this righteousness, bringing us into a right relationship with God and offering us forgiveness and peace. So think about that. Just as Abraham's faith brought him into a relationship with God, our faith in Jesus brings us into that same relationship. This righteousness covers our sins, lifts our burdens, and brings us peace. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, this chapter is an invitation to release the pressure of earning God's love and favor. Yay! Paul tells us that we don't need to strive endlessly or perform perfectly. We just need to believe. Righteousness is a gift given by a loving God who sees our hearts and our faith. So, as we leave today, let's reflect on the faith of Abraham. When we face challenges or things that seem impossible, let's remember his unwavering trust. God's faithfulness is our anchor. He doesn't need us to be perfect. He just wants us to trust in Him and His promises. So ask yourself, where can you lean more on faith and less on striving this week? And are you willing to trust God even when you can't see the outcome? It's beautiful, isn't it? May we carry this message in our hearts. Let's walk forward with faith like Abraham, trusting that God's promises are secure and that his love is steadfast. And you are amazing. I can't wait to spend time with you tomorrow. I'll be back and we're going to discuss Romans chapter 5. It's going to be exciting. I can't wait to talk with you about it. I just love these stories. They're so much fun. You know what? And I love the time that I spend with you as well. Good things are coming your way. I can feel it. I'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation. I'm excited to see you. Take care, friends, and have a beautiful day.